There's some stories that just grab hold of the public mind and they really don't let go, no matter how much time passes. The Jeffrey Epstein case, and especially all those lingering questions about, well, the full scope of his network, that's definitely one of them. The interest is still intense, and those questions just keep coming up. So today we're going to take a closer look at some pretty significant recent statements. These came from FBI Director Kash Patel talking about the investigation into Epstein's activities. But just as important, maybe even more so, we'll dig into the immediate reactions from the public, from the media, that his remarks really set off. Our mission here in this deep dive is pretty straightforward. We're going to unpack exactly what Patel said, try to understand the specific context this was in a formal Senate hearing, remember, and then explore how different people, different groups interpreted all this information. The idea is to give you a clearer map of the different viewpoints in play. It's undeniably complex and definitely an emotionally charged topic. We'll be drawing from some key excerpts titled Epstein Investigation. No credible information beyond himself.
Yeah, and it's such a critical conversation to have because it really touches on, well, a lot of fundamental things, doesn't it? Things like public trust in institutions, the really complicated nature of investigations themselves, and how information, or sometimes the lack of information, gets communicated by officials, and then, how it lands the public. What's really fascinating here is watching just how quickly, how dramatically those official statements can collide head-on with existing public beliefs and deeply held expectations. It tells you a lot about that tension between what's considered a legal truth versus maybe a public truth.
That's exactly the tension we need to explore. So let's set the scene. It unfolds in a very formal, very significant setting. A Senate Judiciary Committee hearing. This wasn't, some casual chat. It was an official proceeding. High-ranking officials under oath, questions with real weight, real potential consequences. And it was right there that Senator John Kennedy, he's a Republican from Louisiana, really honed in with a very specific, very pointed question for FBI Director Kash Patel.
You're absolutely right. The formality matters a lot here. And Senator Kennedy, well, he wasn't beating around the bush. He put it to the director very directly. He asked, and this is a quote, "You've seen most of the files. Who, if anyone, did Epstein traffic these young women to besides himself?" Now, for so many people following this case, that question goes straight to the absolute heart of the frustration, the suspicion, the speculation that swirled around Epstein for years. It's always been about the who else. That's what drives so much of the public concern.
And the director's response was, well, it was just as direct, almost stark, really, in how brief it was initially. Patel's unequivocal reply was, again, quoting directly, himself. Just one word, himself. But he didn't stop there, did he?
No, he didn't.
He went on to elaborate, and this is really where the nuances start to pile up, and honestly, where a lot of the public controversy kicked off.
Absolutely. His full statement added that really crucial context. He said, "There is no credible information, none. If there were, I would bring the case yesterday that he trafficked to other individuals, and the information we have, again, is limited." So that emphasis on credible information and the idea that the existing data has limitations, that's a really profound point, and it's one we definitely need to unpack a bit more.
Okay, so let's do that. When Director Patel talks about credible information and limitations, what does that actually mean in the context of, a federal criminal investigation?
Yeah.
Can you help us and help our listeners understand that specific, maybe legalistic definition and how it might be different from what, say, the public thinks of as information or even evidence?
That's such a critical distinction to make, and it really does go right to the core of the disconnect we're seeing play out. See, in a criminal investigation, credible information isn't just any old piece of knowledge or some allegation someone makes. It's information that investigators deem reliable, something they can verify, and crucially, something that would be legally admissible. It often needs a really strong evidence base that can hold up in court, beyond a reasonable doubt. That's a much, much higher bar than, say, what you might read in a media report or a public rumor, or even a claim that hasn't been thoroughly checked out. Think of it like this. Information that might be compelling enough for a civil lawsuit where the standard is usually preponderance of the evidence. Basically meaning, more likely than not, that same info might just not meet the incredibly strict standards needed to bring a criminal charge or get a conviction.
Okay, right. So to make that a bit more concrete for everyone listening, what kind of information might not qualify as credible under that strict legal definition, even if it's something that's widely believed or, fiercely debated out in the public?
Yeah, great question, because this is exactly where that gap tends to open up. So Information that might fall short for a criminal prosecution could include things like uncorroborated hearsay. Someone says they heard something, but there's no independent proof. Or maybe raw intelligence that hasn't been fully vetted or cross-referenced properly. Even certain kinds of victim testimony, unfortunately, if it lacks enough corroborating evidence, or if there are inconsistencies that would make it really hard to prove beyond a reasonable doubt in a criminal trial. You mentioned civil depositions earlier. Those are often taken under different rules, less strict rules of evidence, maybe less rigorous cross-examination than in a criminal trial. So just using those directly as credible information for a federal criminal case is often problematic without a lot more investigation and validation. The legal system, well, it runs on very specific rules about what evidence is allowed and what's provable. It's often quite narrowly defined.
Okay, that makes sense. And this is where the whole situation gets really interesting, because Director Patel's answer, his statement, it immediately sparked some pretty significant pushback, starting right there in the hearing room. Senator Kennedy, as you might guess, he wasn't satisfied. He straight up called Patel's response inadequate. Yeah. And then Kennedy really spelled out what he saw as the American public's main concern. He said, I think the central question for the American people is this. They know that Epstein trafficked young women for sex to himself. They want to know who, if anyone else, he trafficked these young women to. That's a very fair question. I want to know that answer.
Mm-hmm. And that direct challenge right there from a sitting senator, it instantly threw that deep tension in the director's statement into really sharp relief. And what's particularly revealing here is just how fast that exchange then shot around online, especially on platforms like X, formerly Twitter. It wasn't just reported, it kind of exploded, It turned into this huge debate, just amplifying that feeling of public skepticism even more. It really shows how something said in a formal government hearing can, in minutes, become a global conversation, suddenly facing intense public scrutiny and immediate contextualization.
Right. So as that exchange went viral, what kind of context or, other information did people online and in the media start bringing into the mix? How do they challenge that official statement?
Well, the online world acted almost like a counter-narrative machine immediately. For instance, there was a community note, that feature they used to add context to posts. One got attached pretty quickly to a viral clip of the hearing on X. And this note specifically pointed out that Prince Andrew had previously agreed to settle that lawsuit filed by Virginia Giuffre. Giuffre, as many listeners will know, alleged she was trafficked by Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell when she was a teenager. So bringing up that specific publicly known settlement was seen by a lot of people as, directly contradicting the implication that there's zero information about anyone else being involved.
Wow. Okay. That's a pretty powerful piece of counter-information to surface almost instantly in that online discussion. So this really takes us back to that fundamental disconnect we were talking about. What actually counts as credible information from the FBI's point of view versus what's widely known or alleged or even settled in civil court in the public's eyes.
It's exactly the crux of the issue. And the political reporter, Tara Palmieri, she really nailed this widespread feeling perfectly. She asked this really pointed question in response. She said, basically, what about the victims' depositions who named the men they were trafficked to? Is that not credible evidence? Her question just crystallizes that perceived gap, doesn't it? That feeling that there's this mountain of information out there, allegations, lawsuits, settlements, yet the official channels seem to be working with a totally different, much tighter definition. It really throws a spotlight on a discrepancy that, understandably, a lot of people find deeply, deeply unsettling.
And it's important to remember, this isn't just about, one Senate hearing or one specific soundbite. This whole episode, from that hearing through the immediate, massive public reaction, it really just highlighted the broader sort of lingering public skepticism around the Epstein case. And that skepticism seems particularly focused on whether other high-profile individuals were involved, beyond just Epstein himself, the convicted sex offender, and his associate Ghislaine Maxwell, who, as we know, is serving a 20-year prison sentence right now.
Precisely. The existing public narrative, which has been built up over years, fueled by victim testimonies, by civil suits, by tons of media reporting, it consistently suggests a much wider network, possibly involving influential people. So when you get an official statement from the FBI director that seems to really narrow that scope down significantly, it just inevitably clashes head-on with that narrative the public already holds. This whole incident, it just vividly exposes that crucial disconnect. A disconnect between official statements from an investigative agency, which is bound by those really specific legal definitions of evidence, and the information that's publicly available, even if some of it is contested or hasn't been proven in a criminal court. And for you, the listener, what this really underscores is how that gap can profoundly profoundly shape things, not just public trust in law enforcement or the justice system, but also our collective grasp of these really complex, high-stakes investigations. It's not just about what is said officially, but maybe more importantly, how that statement is perceived and how people try to square it with everything else they think they know or have heard alleged or widely believed to be true. It forces us to confront these different standards of proof and understanding that coexist in society.
So wrapping this up, what does this all mean for us, for you listening to this conversation? We've really explored a very clear, very persistent tension today. On one side, you have the official statement from FBI Director Kash Patel, talking about a lack of credible information linking Epstein's trafficking to other people. And on the other side, you have this immediate, really forceful pushback from the public, from politicians, from the media, pointing directly to stuff that's already out there. Public knowledge, civil lawsuits, powerful survivor depositions that actually made names.
Yeah, and this exploration really, for you, the listener, it ultimately brings up a really important, kind of provocative question that goes way beyond just this one case. In these huge, high-profile investigations, how do we, as a society, how do we weigh these official statements? Statements that often come wrapped in very specific legal language about evidence and credibility. How do we weigh those against allegations that are widely known, against significant civil settlements, against the direct, often incredibly harrowing testimonies of survivors? What does credible information truly mean, not just within the strict rules of a courtroom or an investigation, but out here in the broader public sphere where context and allegations and perceived injustices can carry enormous weight? That difference in interpretation, it profoundly impacts our collective sense of what justice even looks like, how it's supposed to be pursued, and ultimately, I think, our faith in the very systems that are meant to deliver it. It's a question that definitely sticks around, demanding our attention long after the headlines fade.